Mr. Harish Salve. Give a big hand.
Chairman, Shri Vishwanath, Shri Raman, Shri Salve, my dear friend and colleague Arvind, ladies and gentlemen. When Arvind asked me to come and speak in a function to be organized by the Institute of Chartered Accountants, could not resist the temptation. I have been here for a long time, and the opportunity to share a few ideas at such times is always very tempting. But when he told me to speak not on a subject which is nowadays very easy and very familiar for us to speak on, things like judicial activism or what the hell is the Supreme Court up to, but about contemporary issues on taxation, that was a sobering thought. I have lost my day-to-day connection with income tax because, as Arvind told you, to work in the Supreme Court you have to have a varied practice. Civil law, criminal law, from service jurisprudence to constitutional jurisprudence. You have to become a jack of all trades, and therefore you have to cease to be a master of any of them. But then, again, I thought, let me not try to carry coal to Newcastle and try and give you my views on what I think the new set of provisions which are being inserted mean. Not that anybody can tell you what they mean. But let me share with you a few broad, general, macro ideas on, are we headed in the right direction? Are we doing the right thing in what we are doing? Where are we in India? And where should we be going with our tax laws? I think it's very necessary to halt for a minute and look. Are we pursuing the right direction? Is it necessary for India to tax the super rich? Whatever that expression may mean. Do we need a guard? Was Vodafone so horribly wrong that it called for a retrospective amendment? Or are we making a huge mistake in copying Europe, in copying the United States, because our interests are diametrically opposed to theirs? I think this is a question which we need to have a hard look at. We accountants, like bankers, were always considered a very boring lot of people. What all of us did, what the bankers did, what the financial guys did, what the accountants did, was something which you spoke about only if you had insomnia and wanted to go to sleep. There was the old joke which said, a fellow gave up his accountancy profession to become an undertaker because he wanted some action in his life. We have come a long way from there. The Slaughter and May recent report, and everybody is extremely worried about the GAR coming all over the world. UK is bringing it in next year, or this year. The Slaughter and May report starts by saying that tax has become front page news in the UK. Indeed, tax and the avoidance of it may have received as much attention in the UK as any other financial story over the past year. What has changed? I remember when I took the CA final exam in 1977, we had a subject, tax planning, and everybody was wondering, what is this all about? Is there something called tax planning? What is tax planning? And tax planning, 7 points of that paper was understanding the nuances of Section 80C. Which insurance to buy, which fund to buy, public provident fund versus private fund. That was tax planning. Nobody worried about structures. Swiss banks were those where naughty people hid their money. Liechtenstein were where crooks and criminals set up dishonest entities. So we didn't speak about them. That was not tax planning. and possibly correct in those days. Makes sense. India at that time was inspired by a misconstruction of Nehruji's speech. The chairman quoted from Nehruji's speech which said, "So long as there are tears and suffering, so long our work is not over." This was construed to mean as long as you keep people in tears and suffering, the politician will be ever involved. Garibi Hatao was made a permanent institution. Sterile socialism gave way to all good sense, and we paid the price in 91 when we had to send plane loads of gold to get money to keep up with interest payments. Reality had come to bite us, and we turned around. We did wonderfully well. We went into double-digit growth rates. And then suddenly, something went wrong. Let us look at what has gone wrong. Let us look at why has the I in the brick become Indonesia instead of India. Let us look at why people outside India, not the ostriches in India, but the people outside India, when you talk of India, say, please, 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 please don't waste our time. The India story is over. Why such pessimism about India in 1 year? When you talk of India's growth rates coming down to 6%, the Europeans say, oh, we wish we had the same lament. We are contracting at 0.5%. It's not the 6% growth rate which bothers them. Why is the India story over? Let's look at that and let's see where we are going with all this. Let's look at the Western world to understand why we must not follow that example. The decade that was 2000 to 2010 has been a remarkable decade for the West. Post-war, the West was united as never before. The Western world, together with the United States and Australia, was a world united by shared economic interests. The last decade has shown the Western world as a world divided by economic interests. The post-Enron, post-Lehman Brothers scenario is particularly depressing, and it's extremely important for us to understand the dynamics of that. We are divided over conflicts. Europe is convinced that the American imposition of democracy in the Middle East is a euphemism for American protection of its oil interests in the Middle East. And they have good reason to believe that. Democracy is not a virtue you export. The decade has been marked by huge economic decline. Two major factors are blamed. The economic decline of Europe is because of over-concentration of the means of production in a handful of countries. Secondly, the economic decline, curiously, has been created by the very engine of growth created by Europe, which had served it so well. People rightly abuse Lehman Brothers and their ilk for what went wrong. But let us not forget the galloping economic growth which the world had seen would never have been possible without the complex economic instruments and the multiplication of capital, which was created by these sophisticated instruments. It is just that everything is capable of misuse, and these were misused by a handful of people. The powerful economic instruments created has actually brought the first real break from quasi-feudalism. From the feudalism of land, we had the feudalism of industry. Rich families in France, rich families in Italy controlled the most powerful industries. Rich families in the United States controlled the most powerful industries. The Ford family, the Hilton family, the Italian family which owned Fiat, the Italian family which owned the Vespa, and so on and on. You can go on multiplying examples. The French family which owned the vineyards, the rich British aristocracy which owned their Scottish distilleries. Today, there is democracy in ownership of material resources. It's the private equity funds which are the biggest owners, which are the biggest investors. They are all institutionalized in the ultimate analysis. They are all driven by profit, but then there is no other way. Who owns GE today? Nobody knows. Who owns Vodafone? Nobody knows. Who owns any of the big corporations? Nobody knows. The growth of this has led to mobility in capital. Capital finding the most economic place for production. And this is where Europe has paid a price. They did something which was no different from what our politicians do. They pampered their agriculture. In Greece, why is Greece in a crisis? The Greek farmers who drive BMWs and Porsche Cayennes, the concentration is highest in Greece, don't pay any tax. The price for that is paid by the Greek teachers who have been taken away from their jobs because they don't have the money. On the other hand, rampant black money, yes, rampant black money in countries like France and Italy has plagued their system. I don't want to name the person who owns one of the most popular French wines. Each bottle retails in London for 100, 150 pounds. I don't want to name the wine because I would be naming the person. He brings 30 to 40 cases of his wine as samples and sells them in London. Because the socialist regime in France will not allow him to even generate that much money for his lifestyle. That's black money. This is where Europe is. The Eurozone crisis, as everybody has written about, has three reasons. Weak finances, because they have lost their ability to manufacture, bar one or two countries. Weak real economies. Germany and France traded as 1-to-1. Germany and Italy traded as 1-to-1. While the German manufacturing industry is far superior. They traded 1-to-1 because of the euro. Germany has huge positive trade balances. All the other countries owe it money. If they did not have the euro, the currency differences would have corrected the balance and made German goods more expensive. The experiment has failed horribly. And finally, as everybody says, they have a weak government. We saw what happened when Greece was asked to accept the package. We are seeing what is happening in France. The French president, Mr. Hollande, won the election because he promised to tax the rich, and today he has 70% tax. All the rich French industrialists are saying we are leaving France. We don't want to live here anymore. The decade has also seen a new kind of empowerment. The generation born in the 80s is not 25 years plus, 20 to 25 years plus. And they have been empowered by communication as never before. It is in this scenario that Europe finds itself completely hamstrung. It doesn't know where to go. The European powerhouse has got over-centralized. when they talk of Eurozone, it virtually means Germany will run the rest of the world. They are divided. Farid Zakaria wrote a beautiful article saying, it's time everybody said thank you to Germany. The Guardian hit back by saying, it's time Germany said thank you to everybody else for making it so powerful because of the common currency. And then it went on to say, Angela Merkel is going to achieve more with the Eurozone budget than Hitler could with his armies. She will rule Europe. It is in this mood that Europe and European politicians, including British politicians, have attacked tax planning as the single biggest evil. Why have they attacked tax planning? They have attacked tax planning because they are countries which house consumers, not producers. Because they are countries in which multinationals originate but don't pay tax. Recently, there has been a huge rumpus in United Kingdom about the fact that the rich don't pay taxes. It is bound to happen. Britain is known for its austerity post-World War II. How powerful were the Brits and the Europeans, how they came out of World War II. It's a lesson worth learning. But that's not the generation today. The generation today is a much softer generation who has been born into prosperity. They've been born into a society where getting a job was a given. And if you didn't get a job, social security was a given. They didn't have to strive for this. They were born into a society where basics of life were taken for granted. For the first time, they are seeing redundancies as never before. There is bound to be resentment. In an article in 2012, The Guardian wrote, at the other end of the spectrum, though things are going swimmingly, when it was talking about job cuts and austerity, the richest 1,000 people of Britain have seen their wealth increase by 155 billion since the crisis began. More than enough to pay off the whole government deficit of 119 billion at a stroke. And these rich are 0.01% of the British population. So naturally there is anger. There is anger because on the one hand there are redundancies, there are layoffs. Those countries find themselves where they are because 25 years back Britain decided to switch to a service provider country rather than a manufacturing country. Over 80%, over 75% clearly of their gross domestic product comes from services. They did wonderfully well when the rest of the world was prospering. But you can only provide services to the manufacturing sector. When there is a downturn in the manufacturing sector, the first thing it does is cuts back on services. Today they find themselves in a position that they are incapable of running industry. Yes, I use the word carefully, incapable of running industry. Look at two examples. The single largest private employer in the United Kingdom is the Tata Group of India. They call it a reverse colonization. We mock the Tatas in India. Ratan Tata was a revered figure in London. Tatas took Jaguar Land Rover and at the end of the second year of their management turned a £1 billion profit. And this was without any major layoffs. The Brits are eternally grateful to the Tatas. One of the largest employers in Europe is the Mittal Group. They have been able to turn the steel industries of Europe around. Because Europeans have forgotten how to run industry. Why are they reacting the way they are reacting? There are three recent examples which have created a huge furor in England. Do we have any such problems? We don't. Let me give you those 3 examples. Starbucks. Starbucks paid 10 million pounds, yes, only 10 million pounds tax in the UK. In an operation, annual operation, which is over 2.8 billion. There was a protest which was published in The Economist. Outside the Starbucks outlets, where people started surrounding the Starbucks outlets, saying we will boycott Starbucks, we will not allow people to go to Starbucks unless they pay income tax. Could you ever believe tax planning could assume a position like this? And one of the placards being carried by one of the ladies spoke the story. It said 74% of the 15 billion tax cuts, that's the tax cuts that the government is having to impose. 74% of the 15 billion tax cuts is being taken from women's income. Naturally, tax planning now is on the front page. Google is the second second company on target of the British tax authorities. Google, which is an American company, has repatriated 200 million, yes, only 200 million to the US in the first 3 quarters of 2012. A multi-billion-dollar enterprise is returning $200 million home. It has paid in US, and you will be startled to hear this figure, $10 million of corporation tax, a company of Google size. There was a recent report by the Trade Unions Congress in UK which said 25 billion annually is lost from tax avoidance. This is made up of 13 billion from tax avoidance by individuals and 12 billion from the largest corporations. How did these figures ratchet up to this level? The UK came up with one circular, very simple circular, which said the date of arrival and the date of departure will not be counted as your stay in the UK. So all the rich hedge fund managers bought homes in Monaco. They made an airport for them called the City Airport. You fly in on a Monday, it's not counted. You fly home on Thursday evening because Friday is what they call dress down Friday. You work from home, you do your stuff on the computer where you do all your writing work. You do meetings only Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So you fly home on Thursday evening, the Thursday is not counted. You work the whole week in London and you are residing for 2 days, Tuesday, Wednesday. You can work for 45 weeks and live there for 90 days. One day you miss, you're not a resident in the UK. You take home $1 billion worth of commission, you don't pay tax. You take over 100 million, 200 million, those are the kind of bonuses they get. Yes, they've brought prosperity to the UK. Why did UK do it? Not because they had a corrupt regime, but because these people brought billions and billions of dollars worth of business to the UK. Now that things have gone sour, they want to tax these people. Fair enough. We need to learn from what Starbucks said in its defense. And that's where we should begin. Starbucks said, we would rather pay tax in the country where our goods are produced than the country where our goods are consumed. Who do we want to be? The producing country or the consuming country? Can we afford to be the consuming country? Or should we be the producing country? Their notions have changed. In the land of the Duke of Westminster principle, George Osborne now says in his latest speech that aggressive tax planning is morally reprehensible. Prime Minister Cameron in his speech in Davos day before said, I will make, to quote his words, damn sure that multinational firms pay their fair share of tax of UK operations. Why is all this happening? All this is happening because capital has found its way into the most lucrative producing areas. India, let us remind ourselves, has been the beneficiary of mobility of capital. What should India's position be? Let's look at one example. Intel Corporation has opened up in India. Intel, in a statement when it was criticized for not paying taxes in the US, said that we have operations in 30 countries around the globe. The Intel chip is developed at the design center in Oregon. It may be manufactured at a wafer fabrication facility in Ireland, packaged and tested in Malaysia, and then sold to a customer in Australia. Another chip may be designed in Japan, fabricated in Israel, packaged and tested in India, sold in China. We shift, they said, production facilities, and remember this, in response to tax rates. Should we happily then ape the West? Or should we become the attractive nation? We are repeatedly told, oh, look at what the organization of the OECD has done. The OECD came out with this famous report, the harmful effects of tax competition, or harmful tax competition, something like that, in 1998. Post-Bush, what did it finally end up about? Something which is indisputable, that there should be no black holes. You must not have opacity. You must have transparency. Who is asking for transparency? Maximum, the US. Why? Because US taxes its citizens globally, wherever you may be. Their rules on expatriation is so enormous that even former US citizens who have moved outside the US are taxed if the reason for movement is not genuine. That's how the US believes in taxing its people. So US wants information, and yet, to quote Professor Philip Baker, who I had the privilege of working with in the Vodafone case, said, the biggest tax island is a small island called Manhattan Island. They don't give information to anybody. If you're not a US citizen and you manage to get your money in Manhattan, you're completely safe. No country in the world will be given information by Manhattan banks. That is why they say that a lot of the Latin drug money is in Manhattan banks. So, everybody has double standards, but we unfortunately seem to be feeling, oh look, the land of the Duke of Westminster is now going the other way, so we must follow them there. In India, we have always drawn the line. Nobody compels you to arrange your affairs so as to pay the maximum amount of tax. Please look at India. We are not a land of multinationals. We are not yet a place where our homegrown corporations shift monies abroad. Homegrown corporations pay taxes in India. They generate employment in India. They invest in India. They produce in India. We are not yet in that privileged position that companies like Google, companies like Starbucks, companies like Amazon, who are formed in our country, have such wide global reach that they manage to park their income in 50 different locations and we don't get our fair share. We are not there. We are worried about our corporations. We had confusion in the McDowell judgment. Justice Chinnappa Reddy, intellectual giant that he was, made no secret of his leftist leanings. He, in his judgment, mixed up tax planning and tax avoidance because maybe in his perception there was no difference. The majority very carefully followed them, but made it clear. There was confusion. Two judges and Azadi Bachao Andolan explained it. Challenged by the tax department. Vodafone clarifies it. It says, and why does Vodafone clarify? There are 4 paragraphs in the majority judgment which cite with approval cases which have drawn the line between tax planning and tax avoidance on the one side and tax evasion on the other side. if those cases are cited with approval by the majority, and Justice Mishra very carefully says, therefore on this aspect we agree with Justice Reddy, it is clear what he had in mind. I think we should let it lie there. Do we need to go beyond that? Vodafone clarifies. We have our own judicial guard, as Justice Kapadia calls it. Somebody called his judgment a thesis. I think it's a tribute. Yes, it is a thesis on tax law. It went beyond the facts of Vodafone because the Supreme Court understood, a judge like Justice Kapadia, who understood finance, who understood the need for wiping the tear from every eye, which can only be achieved by capital growth, by development, by jobs, not by claptrap. He understood the need for stability. He understood the need for clarity. Foreign firms want clarity. They don't care what your tax is. They want clarity. And that is why he said, we have our judicial guard, round-tripping, circular trading, fiscal nullities are under our law as it stands, something which you can look through. But don't be suspicious. Where did we go with that? And we have the direct taxes code. Instead of the economic benefit text, we seem to be drifting towards the tax benefit test, a very slippery slope. One of the oldest countries which has GAR is Canada. There was an explanatory note issued by the Department of Finance of Canada, and see what they said. They said it is intended to prevent abusive tax avoidance transactions. The word abusive is key here. Abusive tax avoidance or transactions or arrangements, but at the same time is not intended to interfere with legitimate commercial and family transactions. The rule seeks to distinguish between legitimate tax planning and abusive tax avoidance and establish a reasonable balance. In a 2011 ruling, Copthorne Holdings in Canada, the Canadian Supreme Court said to trigger the GAR there, 3 things were required. A, there was a tax benefit, but that's only one of the 3. 2, there was a transaction giving rise to the benefit in an avoidance manner. And 3rd, which is the key, this which gave rise to the tax benefit was abusive. China came out with their own rules, which had the same principle. Abuse of tax incentives, abuse of treaties, abuse of the corporate structure, use of havens for avoidance of tax, and other business arrangements without legitimate purpose. And let me share a very important story with you. The moment the Vodafone judgment came, the Chinese made inquiries as to who were the people associating. They found out PwC was associated in the case. And one of the PwC partners, Pawan, who was with us throughout, actually the Hutchison accountant. He was requested by the Chinese authorities to come and explain the Vodafone judgment. Because they said, we want to make our law in line with the Vodafone judgment. Our draft code, which has been deferred, is a nightmare. To have something as vague as an arrangement to have tax benefit, which is carried out in a manner not normally employed, or rights and obligations not normally created, and results directly or indirectly in the misuse. Now, what is misuse or abuse? So, misuse is something lower than abuse. Where are we going with all this? At which we are told, oh, but why you worry? We have a robust judicial system and these will be ironed out. This doesn't convince any foreign investor. Why does it not convince any foreign investor? Because our Prime Minister told Gordon Brown, when he wrote to the Prime Minister saying, why are you retrospectively applying tax rules to Vodafone? Why did he say that? Because Vodafone structure came, the Hutchison structure which Vodafone bought. Almost half the companies in that structure were purchased by them. Bestech went out, the Israelis went out, Hindujas went out, Swiss Telecom went out from small circles. All these transactions were offshore transactions by purchase of upstream company shares. Exactly what Hutchison did with Vodafone. Not one of them was taxed. But when Hutchison sold to Vodafone, they sought to tax the whole. So Gordon Brown wrote to our Prime Minister saying, why are you applying it retrospectively? You've never taxed these before, why are you applying it now? If you want to tax these kind of transactions, tell everybody that, look, if you sell an offshore share, we will tax it. Our Prime Minister wrote to him, and this letter was quoted in the Economic Times. He said, I understand that there is no retrospective application of taxation, and a recent court judgment has affirmed this position. I can assure you, sir, that Vodafone will have the full protection of the law and the access to the judicial system in India. These are our Prime Minister's words. We saw what happened. What has happened is people have lost faith. What persuaded the Supreme Court to decide Vodafone the way it did? Believe me, the court had, when we opened the case, concerns about our interpretation of the law. But when they understood how Indian industry is structured, where they understood how India is structured, where they understood what it means in India to have these rules, they rejected the argument of the revenue. They note in one paragraph the key facts which turned the law. The structure was in place since 1994. In all the operations, there were Indian companies, nothing was outsourced. A few thousand crores of tax have been paid by the Hutchison Indian companies to the Indian exchequer. What was at stake was an exit by Hutchison. So what have we done? Here was a case not of financial institutions buying shares in the Indian market to trade. Here was a case of a telecom company coming in where the Indian market was nascent. Nobody knew whether they would or would not make money. Investing 10 billion, over 5 to 6 billion dollars over a period of time. Yes, they made 11 billion, but they invested 4 to 5 billion dollars in setting up operations, in consolidating operations, in making it a pan-India operation, in living through all the vicissitudes of policy changes, and setting up a structure. Now, if you tell a foreign investor who is bringing capital to produce in your country, and let's remember what Starbucks said, they would rather pay taxes where the products are created. He is paying tax where the product is created, where he is rendering his telecom service. What you are now telling him is that if you were to exit, there is a tax on you. Yesterday, Mr. Chidambaram has again said we must exempt long-term capital gains. That's one of the things up on the table. What did the Supreme Court say? They said here is a genuine investor who has been in place for so many years, so his structure is not a make-believe. He is now exiting. Now, if you tell a foreign investor there is a 20% cost on exiting, because please understand one thing, a domestic shares his income by paying tax. For a foreign investor, tax is a cost on exit on his investment. So if he is investing $100, he wants a return of 20. One of the ways of getting a return on his 100, he is not here to live. He wants mobility. He has come to you because of mobility. He has not come to you because he is born and brought up in this country. He has come to you because you are cheaper. than where he was, and he will leave you if you become more expensive than what you are today. China is facing that problem today of high cost. This is India's moment. Do we want to make exit of foreign investment more expensive, or do we want to impart greater mobility? Do we want to show we are a stable regime, or do we want to show that we are happy to change our laws minute to minute? Are we a country where people cannot believe what our Prime Minister says? Why will they invest in it? It's not a question of $3 billion. It's a question of faith. Believe me, none of the foreign investors who are upset with the retrospective amendment have analyzed the Vodafone judgment and feel strongly it was such a good judgment. Why is it being changed? They don't care. What they understand is your institutional mechanisms have failed. The Indian Prime Minister gave the example saying, look, the British have done it. Why are they complaining about us? What have the British done? There were off-the-shelf schemes in which Barclays Bank was investing. Unlike in India, where the Indian tax department, unfortunately, cannot have a conversation with an assessee. If an Indian tax officer does something sensible in a conversation with an assessee, you'll have the CBI on the stage, you'll have a PIL tomorrow saying the man is corrupt. But in England, they do sensible things, they talk to tax officials. So, in England, they had a conversation with Barclays and said, don't do this, or we'll change our law. Barclays agreed. They wrote a paper in writing with the British government. They reneged on that and raised the defense saying, oh, but you didn't change the law. Osborne said, well, if you are reneging, so can I. And he retrospectively changed the law. How far are we from that example? So, it's not that the foreign investor worries about whether your Supreme Court got it right or wrong. He worries about the fact that he cannot trust you. So why are we shocked then when the chairman of Goldman Sachs, who comes to Bombay on persuasion of one of his board members, Lakshmi Mittal is on the board of Goldman Sachs, he said, let's have the meeting in Bombay. It will be a great confidence building measure. It turned out to be a disaster for the reason that the chairman of Goldman Sachs was a rather outspoken person, who was asked by one of the media persons, so what do you think of the BRIC? He said, why are you interested? He said, the I is now Indonesia, why are you interested? At which point, fortunately, they managed to contain that news report, otherwise hell would have broken loose in the political system. We need energy security in electricity. We need energy security in oil and gas. Yesterday, the Supreme Court in a hearing was constrained to observe, we all want Bijli, but the moment a plant is set up, we make a noise. We have the new TV party of India, which was burning electricity bills and calling the DISCOMs a scam. Why are they calling them a scam? The story of the electricity regulator in Delhi is a scam. Let me share that story. Delhi had a blisteringly hot summer. Delhi is a rich city. It is one of the highest per capita incomes. Huge middle class population. The chief minister knows if there are power cuts in summer, she would lose the job. She told the DISCOMs, buy electricity in power trading, doesn't matter at what price, we will pay you. The electricity companies, it was a cash flow issue. They spent a lot of money buying electricity. They bought electricity in the market at 18 rupees a unit, 16 rupees a unit, and applied to the regulator saying we need interim correction in tariffs. The regulator did something remarkable. I have no doubt in my mind he was looking forward to contesting the next election. He calculated the huge profits the DISCOMs would make from trading in power. Now where would this power come from? The 3 new NTPC plants which would come up that year. He didn't bother to check. One of the plants is still on the drawing board. 2 of them are stuck with environmental clearances. But NTPC in one report given 6 years back said those plants will be commissioned in 2012. So he assumed that we will commission those plants, you will generate so much electricity, there will be huge surplus of electricity in North India, the DISCOMs will trade in this, they will earn 25 rupees a unit, and he actually on that basis said, far from giving them an interim correction upwards, we must give them an interim correction downwards. He proposed that, his 2 members did not agree. The Delhi government issued a directive, a PIL was filed in the High Court. When these figures came out, the High Court threw the petition out. Of this very group, which is now burning bills. Mr. Prashant Bhushan appeared in that petition. The High Court, when they saw the figure, they were appalled. They threw that petition out. Can we afford this kind of luxury? What is happening in oil and gas? I must tell you a very interesting story. We all hear about how terrible Mukesh Ambani has built his huge big house and he wants more money for gas. We are importing gas. The average landed cost is $18. The oil well, the gas well has not behaved the way it should. But then that's Mother Nature for you. It is 2 kilometers under the earth in sandstone. It's one of the most complex wells in the world. He is asking for $6 so that he can drill more wells. We will not give him those $6, but we will import it 18. Recently, Mr. Anil Agarwal, who is the chairman of Vedanta Group, told me of a conversation he had with the Qatari Prime Minister. They were together. The Qatari Prime Minister told him, Mr. Agarwal, why doesn't your country fix the roads? There are so many bugs. And he gave him a very telling answer. He said, sir, how can we don't have the money? Because they won't pay my company $60, thinking that I will make too much money. So they buy it from you at $113. So all the money goes to you. Where will we fix our roads? We are becoming an import-driven economy. We are importing the troubles of others. What do we get by way of reform? Gestures. FDI in retail. It's going to turn the Indian economy around. One of the most eminent businessmen of India described FDI in retail very aptly. He says, why is there so much fuss? It's like this, your daughter has been living with somebody for 4 years, you say, okay, go get married. Tesco has been in India. Walmart has been in India for years. Now that they are here, you say, okay, go ahead. Legitimize your relationship. You have to turn India around. What we need is some serious consideration of what is it that we want. Emulating the Chinese example, emulating the European example, following the Arab Spring, none of this is the answer. We are told democracy has failed. TV debates have replaced parliamentary debates. Yes, it's unfortunate. But let us always remember what Winston Churchill said, that many forms of governments have been tried and will be tried in the world of sin and war. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government, except all those other forms that have been tried from time to time. Democracy is about debate and discussion. Democracy is about saying what we need to hear, not what we want to hear. This is our moment of trial. We, as a community, familiar with finance, familiar with tax laws, familiar with what it takes to help business grow, have to speak up. Or else, not only us, but this nation will be condemned to silence. The tryst with destiny, which Chairman Vishnu spoke of, was largely ushered by lawyers who wrote the Indian Constitution. In today's day and age, this tryst will be achieved by the financial experts and by the accountants. Thank you.
Standing ovation. Thank you, Mr. Harish Salve.